So let's talk a little bit about some of the latest news when it comes to income inequality and our two-tiered justice system, shall we? Actually, it's probably more like 10 tiers. There's one for the elites and then various levels. But let's, for sake of argument, let's just talk about a two-tiered justice system. So now we've talked many times before about how one of the major progressive disappointments in the Barack Obama administration, and there frankly are quite a lot, but one of the big ones, one of the huge ones, near the top of the list, would have to be his Justice Department's lack of prosecutions when it comes to Wall Street bankers and their countless financial crimes committed leading to the mortgage crash in 2008, the gigantic financial crash. And all the while, we had Attorney General Eric Holder, we had President Barack Obama, and the then head of the Justice Department Criminal Division, Lanny Breuer, saying, hey, be patient. We're working on it. We have task force. Justice is going to be done. If we can make a criminal case, we will. Look, there's a task force here. There's studies here. Believe us, we're doing every single thing we possibly can for justice for the financial crash. And so we wait, and we wait, and we wait, and still no justice. No justice for the countless acts of outright mortgage fraud or derivatives fraud, which cost people their homes, their jobs, their retirements. In some cases, they lost their lives because, they might have been driven to suicide because they had their entire retirement, their home taken away from them because of all of these crimes. So we've talked about this a lot. I've had a lot of journalists on the show, economists on the show to talk about it, people much smarter about Wall Street than I am, because I really don't get it that much at all. I'm not a Wall Street expert here, but all of the journalists, all of the economists we've had on said flat out that the lack of Wall Street prosecutions by Barack Obama's Justice Department are insane and shameful and potentially even criminal when you look at the fact that they're ignoring all of these very obvious crimes. Now another group has actually come out saying the same thing that I'm saying, the same thing that journalists like David Dayen saying, the other 98 are saying. Another big group has actually come out saying that what the Justice Department's record on this is actually shameful. You know what group that is? It's the Justice Department itself. I'm not kidding. The Justice Department thinks that the Justice Department did a horrible job prosecuting mortgage fraud. So more specifically, this is a small part of the Justice Department. This is the Inspector General of the Justice Department. They actually released a report called the, quote, audit of the Department of Justice's efforts to address mortgage fraud. Pretty straightforward, right? So the Justice Department Inspector General backs up pretty much everything that all of us progressives have been saying all along about how horrible the Justice Department has been. Reading from the Justice Department Inspector General report, quote, we found that despite public statements by the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force and the department about the importance of pursuing financial fraud cases, including mortgage fraud, the FBI Criminal Investigative Division ranked complex financial crimes as the lowest of the 6 ranked criminal threats within its area of responsibility, and ranked mortgage fraud as the lowest subcategory threat within the complex financial crimes category. Additionally, we found that mortgage fraud to be a low priority or not listed as a priority for FBI field offices in locations we visited, including Baltimore, Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, end quote. So, again, look, this isn't just me. This isn't some lefty economist or some lefty journalist saying this. This is the Justice Department's Inspector General talking about the Justice Department, essentially saying that it, didn't consider justice for the 2008 crash a priority, that justice didn't pursue it. And again, if you've been following this story, if you've been paying attention, that's not really a surprise, but it's sort of a surprise to see justice actually saying it themselves. So let's read on from the report. Reading on from the report, quote, we also found that while the FBI received $196 million in appropriated funding to investigate mortgage fraud activities from the fiscal years 2009 to 2011, in fiscal year 2011, the number of FBI agents investigating mortgage fraud, as well as the number of pending investigations, decreased, end quote. So What happened here, folks, is they got more money and the investigations decreased. What the hell they did with all that money? I mean, what did they do with the money? They just like, is it sitting in a vault somewhere or something? I don't know. Where is that money that was supposed to be spent on these investigations? But that's not all the report found. That's not all it found. They found that not only did the Justice Department do a crappy job when it comes to mortgage fraud, they actually lied about what they did too. Reading from the report, quote, and this is actually talking about the Financial Fraud Task Force had a press conference in October 2012 bragging about all the great things that they were doing. So this is from talking about Attorney General Eric Holder's press conference in October 2012. Quote, during this press conference, the Attorney General announced that the initiative resulted in 530 criminal defendants being charged, including 172 executives, in 285 criminal indictments or informations filed in federal courts throughout the United States during the previous 12 months. The Attorney General also announced that 110 federal civil cases were filed against over 150 defendants for losses totaling at least $37 million and involving more than 15,000 victims. According to statements made at the press conference, these cases involved more than 73,000 homeowner victims and total losses estimated at more than $1 billion. End quote. Now, that sounds like something. That sounds like they're doing something. And like at the time, I remember having David Dayen on the show right after this was happening. And the truth is, that does sound like something. It's not nearly enough considering the massive scale and the crimes involved in the financial crash when it comes to mortgage fraud and derivatives, but it sounded like something. It sounded like there were actually, something going on here. But here's the deal. You may remember this. Right after that press conference by Attorney General Eric Holder, many people, many journalists, many economists were saying, you know what? Those numbers, they actually don't sound quite right. In fact, even though they should be higher, they frankly seem a little too high for what you're actually doing. We're pretty sure that those numbers aren't true. But despite that, despite being called out in the press in many different areas, the Justice Department kept using them, kept bragging about them in press releases and saying, we're doing such a great job going after justice for for the financial crash. Then in August 2013, nearly 10 months after that, after 10 months of using those numbers and bragging about those numbers, the Justice Department quietly corrected them. Oh, they said, wait a second, what, those numbers? The ones we've been talking about for 10 months? Those numbers? The ones that weren't true, but we kept saying them anyway? Well, those numbers, it turns out you were all right. Those numbers are not true. They were, so how false were these numbers? How off were they? Well, they said that there were 530 criminal defendants charged. Turns out it actually wasn't 530 criminal defendants. There wasn't 530 criminal defendants charged, nor was there 520, nor was there 510, nor was there 500, nor was there 430, or 330, or 230, or 130. There was actually only 107. 107 is if you can't tell, it's a lot smaller than 530. And again, on the scale of things, it's actually way, way too few. And actually, when you actually look at the 107, if you look at it further, this report doesn't say this, but David Dayen and other people have said that 107 actually is so kind of a convoluted number just to begin with. But let's take them for their word. It wasn't 530, it was 107, sure. Of the losses that they were talking about connected to those cases, Justice said that it was 73,000 homeowner victims totaling $1 billion. It turns out that number, $1 billion, was actually high as well. It wasn't $1 billion, it was $95 million. That's 91% less than what the Justice Department was bragging about and claiming. And, that matters because the truth is $95 million is like such a tiny fraction. It is a tiny fraction of what was lost and stolen due to the criminality that led to the crash. I mean, heck, $1 billion is actually, in the grand scheme of the crash, is actually small too, but 95 million is actually a lot smaller than $1 billion. And again, this all came out 10 months later, 10 months as they continued to hype those bogus numbers, as that have been pointed out as bogus right after they claimed them. They still kept rolling them out there like they were doing such great work, which again, it wasn't real justice in the big picture of the crash when it came to it, but they still lied about it. They still lied about these bogus numbers, even though it wasn't enough. Their crap numbers were inflated. It's just crazy stuff here, right? So, pardon me, we actually mentioned Lanny Breuer earlier. If you don't remember or aren't familiar with Lanny Breuer, Lanny, until he resigned from the Justice Department last year, was actually the head of the Justice Department's criminal division that were charged with going after crimes committed in the crash. Lanny, who, if you remember this, we actually covered this on the show, Lanny who famously had this crazy exchange in a PBS Frontline documentary called The Untouchables. And if you haven't seen this documentary and you want to know about the financial crash and how screwed up our Justice Department is, watch it. It's called The Untouchables. It's a Frontline documentary. You can watch it for free online. But Lanny actually had this exchange, and we played it when the documentary came out last year. But I'm going to play it again just to remind you who we're dealing with. This is Lanny Breuer talking about the role of the Justice Department when it came to prosecuting the 2008 financial crash. Take a listen.
You gave a speech before the New York Bar Association. And in that speech, you made a reference to losing sleep at night, worrying about what a lawsuit might result in at a large financial institution. Is that really the job of a prosecutor, to worry about anything other than simply pursuing justice?
Well, I think I am pursuing justice, and I think the entire responsibility of the department is to pursue justice. But in any given case, I think I and prosecutors around the country being responsible should speak to regulators, should speak to experts. Because if I bring a case against Institution A, and as a result of bringing that case, there's some huge economic effect, if it creates a ripple effect so that suddenly counterparties and other financial institutions or other companies that had nothing to do with this are affected badly, it's a factor we need to know and understand.
I have to tell you, that clip still infuriates me. It infuriates me. Right there, the head of the Justice Department Criminal Division is admitting that Wall Street is too big to jail, admitting that even if there's obvious crimes, they're not going to prosecute it because he's worried about affecting other Wall Street banks. They're not going after crimes. They're not going after criminals. Admitting what we all know, if you're paying attention, that our justice system has multi-tiers, at least 2 tiers, probably closer to 10 or 20 tiers, where, again, the elites and the 1% can get away with anything and everything, including crashing the global economy that cost millions of people their homes, their jobs, their retirements, all that stuff. So, anyway, Lanny Breuer, scumbag extraordinaire, left the Justice Department in 2013. He left and he became the vice chair of the law firm Covington and Burling, which Covington and Burling, I know you're going to be shocked to hear this, ladies and gentlemen, but Covington and Burling, that law firm, surprise, surprise, guess what they do? They defend Wall Street against fraud allegations that used to be brought by the Justice Department headed by Lanny Breuer. They defend against Lanny Breuer's pathetic allegations that he brings against them. So our friend David Dayan actually had a story in Salon a couple weeks ago about how Lanny Breuer's law firm now has press materials that they send out. They actually have quotes and press materials from clients bragging about how little money they had to pay in Justice Department fines. That's in the press materials, folks. They actually have Lanny Breuer's picture in the bloody materials. Here we have a former Justice Department head who was charged with going after these Wall Street criminals. He leaves, goes to work for a firm, and they put his picture in materials bragging about how this law firm that the former Justice Criminal Head Division head is now working for is going to work with you, Wall Street, to get you out of paying fines for your crimes. It is crazy. It is so bloody crazy. It's like they're like, oh, there's like quotes in these books, in this press materials from these firms being like, oh yeah, we committed all this fraud and all we had to pay was $1 million. Thank you so much, Covington and Burling. It's so sick, and it's so blatantly corrupt. Breuer does a pathetic job going after Wall Street, and then Wall Street hires him to defend them against the next pathetic schlub who will probably get hired by Wall Street later on. It's a sham, a revolving door sham. And speaking of the 1%, the last tiny little story I'm going to leave you with here. Speaking of the 1%, and how, and again, you want to say all this happened under Bush. This is all, the 1% are doing better than ever under President Obama and his Justice Department. Josh Idelson at Salon actually had a report on how the $26 billion spent on Wall Street bonuses last year, the $26.7 billion spent on Wall Street bonuses last year, is actually higher than the entire year's wages of America's entire full-time minimum wage workforce of 1,085,000 people. You heard that. Wall Street last year gave out more in bonuses than we pay our entire minimum wage workforce. Are you ready for a revolution yet? We'll be right back.